to the Two Real Cinema Club. My name is Andres Lamente.
And I am James Rosica. And every episode on the Two Real Cinema Club, we watch two movies, a new movie and an old movie, and then we try to connect the dots. And this episode, we've gone to hell, basically, haven't we?
Hell and back, yeah. Throw in some COVID there on my part, and definitely feels like hell and back. But
it's going to be a slightly downbeat episode, I think. Yeah, because you're recovering from COVID, and
yes.
In the UK, like the weather has just started to turn cold, and all the energy prices have just recently rocketed absolutely massively. So we and everybody I know is refusing to put the heating on. So we're going to kind of keep huddled up, stay under a blanket, keep it on the down low.
Maybe we shouldn't have come back from hell. Hell's a warm place. You don't need the higher energy costs there.
There's things to be said for it.
Yeah, hell ain't so bad, perhaps. But not all is fair in love and war. We watched a couple war films for you. All Quiet on the Western Front, which just came out on Netflix here in 2022.
Yep, same here.
German director. Who was it, Jimmy? You've seen it just
It's Edvard Berger.
Edvard Berger.
He's the director. He directed Deutschland 83, the TV series, which I haven't seen. Okay. We should do the socials first, though, shouldn't we?
Oh, we should, yeah. I'm terrible on socials. Maybe I did that subconsciously, intentionally, because I hate it so much. I'm not qualified to do it, but I love doing it. On Twitter, we are at Two Real Cinema Club at twitter.com. On Instagram, at Two Real Cinema Club at instagram.com. Read the blog at tworealcinemaclub.com. Email us at tworealcinemaclub@gmail.com. And tell your friends. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, wherever else you get your podcasts, and on the big YouTube as well.
YouTube.
Yeah, and tell people. I mean, obviously give us great ratings if you enjoy the show, and that will bring more people to us. I do have a funny thing about Instagram that happened today, because we were practicing can in my basic my level 1 English class, and
so do you mean can, like the International Film Festival, right?
No, I wish. No, just that verb, that modal verb, to be able to.
The verb.
And one of my students she was using it perfectly. She kept saying, because she had to pair it with the word follow, the verb follow. So she had to make a can sentence or a can question with can and follow. And she kept saying, "Can you follow me on Instagram? Can you follow me on Instagram?" And the thing was, I couldn't hear. I mean, she has a Spanish accent, so I couldn't make out Instagram exactly. And I said, "No, I don't know. I don't think so. I don't think so. What are you saying?" And then it finally occurred to me what she was saying, and says, "Well, I can't actually follow you on Instagram, but I finally understand. Yes, you're making a great question." But it just seemed so poignant that I had no idea what she was talking about, even though she was speaking basic English right to my face. But she was talking about the social media, and whoop, went right over my head.
When I was a child, we had to learn phrases about, where is the train station?
Yeah.
Exactly. What time does the cinema open? Whereas these days, it's just, follow me on Instagram and the rest will follow.
It seems like a very sophisticated can follow question for me, so it just got by me. But all was well in the end. So those are the socials. Jimmy, do you want to take it away right off?
Yeah, actually. So
late.
All Quiet on the Western Front.
Yes.
Interesting. Directed by Edvard Berger. I don't know whether you've heard of him. He directed Deutschland 83.
No.
Which I also didn't see. But that's the only thing that I recognised in his CV. It's been written by Berger and Leslie Patterson and Ian Stockwell, who are British, I think Scottish screenwriters. Leslie Patterson, interestingly, she's taken a very standard traditional route into the screenwriting trade. She is a world champion triathlete.
Yeah.
If you go to her website, it's all about training for triathlon, and she'll do a bit of personal training for you if you can find her. And then there's like a little bit of her bio just at the very end, which says, I also do other things. Like, we recently acquired the rights to All Quiet on the Western Front. We're hoping to get it made. So she hasn't updated her website in a long time.
Yeah.
But she's taken that hoary old route into screenwriting.
Yeah, that's just it's just a BTW for the kids these days. Oh yeah, by the way, I've got this massive picture coming out.
So it stars Felix Camera. This is his film debut. Who looks to me like a young Richard E. Grant. Did you think?
Yeah, I could see that.
And Daniel Bruhl is like the only name that I really recognised. who recently seen in our podcast as the star of The Educators.
Yeah,
From like the early 2000s.
Well, it's just wild because now he's playing the middle-aged German guys, and I still think of him as being a young dude.
Yeah,
it's funny. Yeah, growing up before our very eyes. Was he in? Oh God, was it Goodbye Lenin?
I think he was. Yes, I think he was.
So he had some great roles right there at the turn of the millennium.
And then these days, he's like representing Germany for the Marvel Cinematic Universe, isn't he? So he's Baron something.
That's right.
Baron Munchausen, Baron something for the MCU. So he's getting all the gigs. He is the international representation of Germany. So the film is based on the 1928 novel by Erich Maria Remarque, German writer. He was a conscript in the First World War. He was injured. He was sent away from the front. He ended up being a teacher. He wrote his book in 1927, struggled to find a publisher for it for a while. But then when it was published in 1928, it became a massive bestseller. It sold 2.5 million copies in the first 18 months of publication. I think I was asked to read, or we read some of All Quiet on the Western Front when I was at school. And I don't think I read the whole book. Incidentally, I did read it this year. It's been on my list of books to read, and I got to it earlier this year. So I was feeling a little bit smug that I'd done my homework for the pod months ago. It was filmed in 1930. It was filmed again in 1979, a TV movie with Ernest Borgnine. The book itself was banned in Germany in 1933 by the Nazis. Erich Maria Remarque, he fled the country, but his sister Elfriede remained in Germany. She was executed by the Nazis in 1943, I think in lieu of them being able to execute him for putting down the Reich.
Could I interrupt for just a moment?
I'm all ears.
Do you guys have teacher's pet or teacher's pets in England or brown nosers?
Yeah, that's a thing. Yeah, it's
Okay.
It's not just a Van Halen song. It's like is it a Van Halen song? Anyway, that's a thing.
No,
yeah.
I think Van Halen was hot for teacher. That's a different story, Jimmy.
That was it. Yeah.
I just want to let our listeners should know that
I'm
you are
choking on my drink listening to Van Halen. Sorry, yes, carry on.
Our listeners should know that you are very studious. You're a great student, and you definitely are trying to get to some brownie points or brown nose points. Or you're the teacher's pet on this.
I'm the teacher's pet this
podcast
week.
for sure. Okay, I'm sorry. Go on.
I should have brought you an apple. So the film is, having recently read the book, the film is a reasonably loose interpretation of the events in the book. So it opens up with a fox in a burrow, which is not the opening that I was expecting. And it kind of becomes a bit of a theme in the film. So the fox is woken up by distant explosions, and we cut to a battle on the fields in 1917 in the First World War. So there's a long tracking shot. We follow a soldier called Heinrich, and the film really wants us to know that his name is Heinrich because everyone is calling this guy Heinrich. We follow him, we track him over the top onto the wasteland. It's a very vicious, brutal fight scene. People are smashing into each other with axes and shooting each other with guns, chucking grenades at each other. It's extremely violent, literally explosive opening. And at the very climax of this very initial fight, in the first couple of the minutes of the movie, just as another guy gets smashed in the face, you get a smash cut to the title, All Quiet on the Western Front. And I don't know whether you did at this moment in the film. I laughed. It seemed like such an overblown irony that they were putting up this title, All Quiet on the Western Front, after you'd seen this enormous, brutal battle. I'm sure that's not the effect that they were aiming for, but the timing of that scene really felt like a comedy sketch to me.
Yeah, well, I think there are a lot of these very quick and very massive juxtapositions, and a lot of them are ironic throughout the film. So I think it's consistent with what was going to happen throughout, but it is kind of jarring.
Yeah. Because the other juxtapositions didn't make me laugh, but this one did. I don't know. I think that tells you more about me than it does about the film. So we follow Paul. Paul, played by Felix Camera, and his friends. They're 17 years old, coming out of school with their uniforms on. They're signing up to join the German infantry. Paul signing up against his parents' wishes. His friends kind of cajole him or encourage him or bully him, pressure him into joining up, and he fakes his father's signature, and they get very excited about going away to the front and marching on Paris in a few weeks' time. There's a rousing speech by one of their teachers, and they all go off to collect their uniforms, and Paul's uniform has got the name Heinrich sewn into the collar. It's, I think, a really lovely opening that, again, has no connection to the book, but the film follows the story of Heinrich's coat for the first 5 minutes. So we see Heinrich wearing his coat. Heinrich gets killed, and then the coat is peeled off him on the battlefield, taken back from the front lines, washed, sewn, repaired, stitched together, given to the new set of recruits. It's a cute, clever way into the story. Actually, I rather enjoyed it.
Yeah, I thought it was great. And then doesn't Paul say, "Oh, I think this is someone else's jacket," and then the sort of the guy at the table who's enlisting him just pulls the tag right out, throws it away. There's Heinrich. Goodbye. Hello, Paul.
Yeah,
You'll be the next to die in this coat. It's kind of the sentiment there.
So the boys pretty much immediately get taken off to the front, and it is hell, as we were promised. Characters are blown up literally into pieces in front of us, gassed, shot, crushed. This part of the film really reminded me of the opening of Saving Private Ryan.
Yes.
It has that feel of brutality, hopelessness. But there is another strand to the story, again, which doesn't come from the book. So Erzberger is some kind of German official. He's played by Daniel Brühl. He is keen to negotiate an armistice from the point of view of the German High Command. So we see him counting up the names of all the young men who've been killed. He wants to persuade the High Command that we're not going to win. We need to cut our losses and surrender, or at least have a ceasefire as soon as possible. Otherwise, we're just going to lose so many more young men. So we follow his story while Paul's story continues rather episodically. So we have various episodes of them in the trenches. Franz, one of Paul's friends, he spends a night with a French woman, and he comes back with a little bit of her underwear, which they pass around the barracks. His older friend, Kat, and they steal a goose, which they cook and eat. They go on an expedition to find missing soldiers who have been killed by gas. This is a fairly episodic, piecemeal middle section to the film, juxtaposed against Erzberger's struggle to get on the train, make the journey to meet the French, and try and get a signature on some papers to say that there's a ceasefire. So he does eventually meet the French. The French tell them, we're not going to negotiate. These are the terms of the ceasefire. You've got 72 hours to accept it. And there will be no ceasefire until you've signed the paper. So Erzberger, very conscious that every hour that he spends not signing this paper is going to cost more lives, has to wait to get the thumbs up from High Command. And in the meantime, Paul and his buddies are still being bombarded on the front line. The paper finally gets signed with 45 minutes of the film to go, which surprised me. And it turns out that because the French want to wait until there's a nice round number, the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, there's going to be another 6 hours of hostilities before they'll declare the peace. And so the third act, the final climax of the film, is that Friedrichs, who is the commandant for Paul's division, he wants a victory before the end of the war. So in the final 15 minutes of the war, before the ceasefire that will be announced at 11 o'clock, his troops are all pushed into making a final attack, and Paul is finally killed in trench warfare. He's the last man to die before 11 o'clock in the morning. So we end with this extremely long held shot of his face, at last at peace, I suppose, in the trenches, while everybody around him packs up and goes home. How familiar were you with the book and the story?
Not at all. Not at all. I think, like you, it might have been on a list of recommended books. I don't think we read it as part of school. I don't think we read an excerpt. So I knew the title. I've heard it a million times. I don't think I've seen any of the films that you mentioned. So I actually came to it um, pretty like a novice, like an absolute newbie. I didn't know much about it at all. In fact, I had always assumed that it was written more from the Allied or um, the,
Ah.
the other side. I didn't know it was a German tale, so that was interesting to me.
There are a lot of differences from the book. There are also some similarities, but many differences, I think. I tried to make a little list of the things that I remembered vividly from the book, which don't appear in the film. There's a big emphasis on boots, that one of Paul's comrades in the book gets injured and he's dying, and all of his friends gather around and they're all kind of trying to control him and trying to encourage him to hang on when they know that it's hopeless. But all of them are secretly eyeing his boots because he has these fantastic boots, and they're just sort of waiting for him to die so they can get the boots. The scene in the movie where France goes off and he spends the night with a French woman is much more elaborate in the book. I think all the boys go off and they find these French girls and they spend the night with them, and it's a much bigger event, probably bigger than all of those missing events. In the book, halfway through the story, Paul has a trip home. So he is sent home from the front and has to spend a couple of weeks on leave trying to live as a civilian.
Oh, gosh.
And all the kind of older adults in the town are asking him, how's it going at the front? Well done. We must be close to victory. You're doing a great thing for the country.
Yeah.
And they're all kind of giving him their little tips and their bits of strategy. And he knows that this is all, utterly hopeless, and he feels lost and completely unable to fit in now. He's been institutionalized by the army and can't live a civilian life. And at the same time, his mother is dying. But neither of them want to say it out loud, and he's sort of aware that he's never going to see his mother again, but he hasn't got the mental equipment to speak to her anymore. It's very touching, and it provides this great kind of contrast to the brutality of the battle in the middle of the book, which I think is one of the things that really elevates the book, and it's interesting that is missing from the film. I think a lot of these things lend a lot of depth to the character of Paul, which is sort of missing from the film, I thought. I enjoyed the performance, but he's kind of the embodiment of innocence, I think, in this film. And not given a great deal of depth. He's just kind of wide-eyed and naive, and having his soul crushed right in front of us. And he's not allowed very much more depth than that.
No, I think the film certainly benefits from just sort of archetypal characters with the commandant as well, and you've got the bureaucrat, and then the young guys, and Kaczynski's there, I guess they call him Kat. He seems like the more experienced veteran. It turns out he's not that much older than the others, but he's definitely presented as a veteran. So you had all the archetypes. You even had the drill sergeant a little bit. It was very brief when they were first taking their guns into the front, I think. So you had a lot of the classic types, but not a lot of depth. I agree with you on that one.
I think what the film does really well is the photography. It's a beautiful, fantastic photography in this film.
And it communicates ugliness really well. I think that's hard to do. Like it's a very beautiful film, even though a lot of its images are very ugly, obviously. But like the comparison of flares to actual gunfire. There's some beautiful shots where you're just seeing the sky light up with flares. Comparing that with in a seconds change on screen, all of a sudden it's more like mortar fires that are so ugly. So I mean, it does a really great job of balancing beautiful filmmaking but communicating what it's supposed to do. This film is supposed to be ugly, and it's that as well.
It's very visceral and bloody. There are, very explicit stabbings, mutilation. The camera really focuses in on the injury. I was quite surprised to see that in the UK it carries a 15 certificate. Before watching it, I was thinking, maybe the children would like to watch this. My two are 15 and 12, and I was kind of thinking, this could be a valuable educational experience, and learn a bit about the First World War. And I tell you what, I'm glad they didn't see it. My goodness. Nightmare for years, I think. It is extremely explicitly brutal and bloody. But the battle scenes have been very skillfully filmed. I mean, scenes where the tanks are introduced. I think it's, it's a great bit of cinema.
Yeah.
Scenes where guys turn up with flamethrowers, like they have stepped straight out of hell. I mean, it's very skillfully done.
Yeah.
You can really feel the terror in your gut.
Yeah.
It's the first time I think I've seen a film that has portrayed a literal red mist that the soldiers are running into.
Yeah.
The machine gun fire is just vaporizing these boys who are leaping over the edge and turning them into a red mist. I mean, it's astonishing. It's technically, very accomplished, I think. A terrific achievement. But I'm not sure that the writing and the character development quite matches that visual level of achievement.
I would agree with you there. I think this is a great film. I think it's a masterpiece. I wasn't looking at it so much for great character development because I guess I never thought it was going to deliver that anyway. So I was in this film from the very beginning. I thought it was fantastic. And I did write down at one point a couple of things. I wrote that this is essential violence versus something that we've seen in maybe The Northman or some of the, or RRR, some of these other films we've seen recently where there's just violence on top of violence. This is really violence that's communicating how awful and how idiotic war is, and this is really an anti-war film as far as I could see, by people who at least have some contact with the First World War and knew how to communicate it on screen. So I think the violence does what it should in my mind here, is that it's just showing how stupid this is to put two armies digging trenches 100 yards from each other and spending all this time waiting around to attack each other. And, there's just so much carnage. There's so many bodies that are just sacrificed for absolutely no reason whatsoever. And I think this film does that really well. And as a result, maybe you sacrifice the character development of those bodies, but that's not why they're there in the first place. I think they're supposed to be numbers more than they are names and characters, I think. And the film does that really well.
It did make me chuckle when I read the Wikipedia page. One of the summaries, it says, critics praised the film for staying faithful to the book's anti-war message. Okay, yeah. Which did make me think, well, you don't say. I would have been quite surprised if someone had made a book of All Quiet on the Western Front and you'd come out punch in the air like you'd seen Top Gun Maverick. Yeah. Can't wait to get down to the front. Yeah, it looks great.
But it does it well in so many different ways. I'll talk about a couple images that stuck with me. Early on, soldiers bailing water out of a trench this trench using their helmets, and it just seems so futile. And it's like that water's going to fall right back in. You're going to have to get right back up and bail it out again with your helmet making no difference whatsoever. I thought it was just such a great comment on war. There's one of the best dead horses I've ever seen. I think it comes before that very last battle where the commandant sends them back in to fight for 15 minutes before 11 o'clock. And the first thing you see before they head out into the no man's land is a dead horse. And it just kind of sits there and it's like, we're beating a dead horse. I mean, there were just images like that were so compelling. And then in terms of some of those juxtapositions, I think the most intense one is when Paul is he's isolated on the front line. The tanks have come through, the flamethrowers have come through, and he's basically faced with this one Frenchman in this gigantic puddle of blood. They're down and low, and he has to kill this man basically with his hands again and again. It's a long death because Paul's really struggling with it. He's never really looked a man in the face for very long and had to kill him, and he's doing that. And the juxtaposition after he's finally killed him goes right to I guess you said he's a commandant. He's eating at a long table, I believe. He's just in luxury, eating fantastic foods, and his uniform is perfectly starched and pressed and beautiful. But he's sending people out onto the front lines to do what Paul just had to do. And I think that, again, just great images. I think it's just such a commentary. And this film was made probably long before Vladimir Putin went into Ukraine, but I thought Putin immediately when I saw this guy sending people into war for no reason other than basically tradition, because his own father fought for Otto von Bismarck in the day, and victory was the thing above all else. But there's no reason to fight, and this guy's just sending them in and not doing anything himself because he's got that power to. And I just thought, this is Putin. It was timed perfectly in that way, but it was probably shot and written before that. But it's just a great commentary on war, and I think it was done really, really well. The music too, the sounds, and you just saw it a couple hours ago, you said. So some of some of that music is still sort of resonating in me. Just this big electronic, it didn't really meet the era well. It's not 1914 and 1918 music. It's definitely modern
it's anachronistic,
music.
isn't it?
It's anachronistic, but it's so effective. And I just thought it was really, really well done. So I'm not a big fan of war films in general. And I guess I don't look for a great story. I think this one has a better story than the next one we will talk about after our break eventually. But I think it's compelling. I understand why you would maybe take that scene out with Paul going back home, because you're already working on a couple of different locations and you're sort of bouncing around a little bit. So I think taking him out of that scene would probably just further confuse or might dilute the effect of some of the war scenes, because there are some homey war scenes when the Corps is just sort of holed up in a French farmhouse somewhere and stealing geese and all that. You've got some of these slow moments in war where they're a couple miles away from the front, they're not really fighting, and it's hard to place it all together because the French and the Germans meet on a train when they're negotiating the treaty. So you're already kind of working in a couple of different locations or a couple of environments. So I think if you'd thrown Paul back to the family and to his hometown, it would probably just kind of dilute the story a bit more.
But I would counter-argue that it's not a short film, is it? It's like 2 hours 20. I would think, there probably is a bit of time for a bit more character development, actually. I don't know. We don't even follow very many characters.
No.
So I wonder whether maybe there is a little bit of space for that. I'm glad you mentioned the horse thing, actually, because there is this big theme of like animals and captivity in the film. They keep going back to. They start with the foxes.
Yeah.
But there's things like this little beetle that Cat keeps in in a matchbox, isn't it?
Yeah.
And then when they come back to the farmhouse one night and someone has captured a moth in a glass.
Yeah.
So this kind of repeating imagery about animals in captivity.
Yeah, well, it's hard to accept the fact that you as a human might have less freedom than an insect or a mammal that can get out of a trench. I mean, the ability of a fox to get out of trouble is certainly valorous, I guess.
I agree with you. I think it is a great achievement. It's a terrific film, but I still think we can place a call to the Cliché Squad.
Ooh.
Cliché Squad.
Pray tell, because I think I have some cliches too. But
but I don't know. The big one that got me was just this notion of the top brass eating fine food.
Yes,
I feel like I've seen a little too often this scene of a young being slaughtered while some guy with a moustache complains that his croissant is not fresh.
Yeah,
you're like, I mean, it gets the idea across, but I feel like I've seen that.
Yeah.
That notion used a little too often for me to feel comfortable that it's that it should be in the film.
Yeah, fair play. And I think they do it on both sides. Don't the French are complaining of the croissants?
They do, yeah.
And then the German is there just eating and dining and drinking wine and
like slurping his coffee.
Yeah. So good. That's a good one. My cliche, I don't want to show my hand too soon, but I've seen this in many films too. And the reason I say that is because we're going to get to the same cliche in the next film, which is the gun as your lover, treat it like you're a woman, and you go to bed with it, because we see that in both films. Coupled with the intense drill instructor, I think, which we see in both films again. I think that is Cliché Squad worthy as well.
Phone the squad.
Yeah, but I mean, for me, if you're communicating that idea about how the people who really pay for war are the people who have no business in it, they don't really have a say in it, they don't have any skin in the game, I guess, other than their own skin, which gets shot up. I mean, I think that's a compelling image, but yeah, you're probably right, overdone in the sense of dining well while others are barely dining.
So, well, you know what? Overall, for a Netflix original, after doing the pod for a while, I start to get a sinking feeling whenever I see a Netflix original come up. You know what? For a Netflix original, this is pretty goddamn good.
I thought it was very good. I did watch it in German, reading subtitles, which was a good option. But actually, the English that I looked at, it didn't look very badly dubbed. So you could see it in English if you wanted to as well. I don't know if you did.
I wasn't even aware there was an English dub, actually.
Yeah. You could select a bunch of different languages to listen to the film in. So I'm going to say, I would give that one a thumbs up. I really enjoyed it. I'm not someone who likes war films in general, but I was pleasantly surprised, and I thought it was very well done. It was a really good bit of filmmaking. Right.
Well, let's have a break.
Yeah.
And then when we come back, we're going to talk about another war film. I think a war film which will certainly have been seen and watched very closely by the people who made or Quiet on the Western Front. We'll come back and we'll talk about Full Metal Jacket.
Perfect.
So, Andres, it's Christmas coming up, right?
Yes. Oof.
And time to buy people gifts.
Yeah, I don't like that part.
You ever struggle with gifts?
Every year. We've done some different things in my family, but still, even buying 1 or 2 gifts. Oof.
Well, I'm happy to announce that from this year, you can buy a Two Real Cinema Club gift for your loved ones. We are launching the Two Real Cinema Club Sub Club Geek Club Box Sub. It's a new subscription box that you or your loved one can enjoy every month for just $59.99 a month, or even less if you pay more. You can join for 6 months, pay £62 a month, or sign up for a year and pay just £71 a month, plus a few small additional charges. But you may well be asking, what is in the Two Real Cinema Club Sub Club Geek Club Box Sub Box? Well, every month we will send you an amazing gift box full of great free stuff that you've paid for. Every box contains a T-shirt in a random size featuring a quote from a film that you haven't seen, plus literally 2 or 3 other things that you don't want. You can subscribe at a higher tier and get up to 7 things you don't want every month. Gifts include a handful of water-damaged postcards featuring anime characters that you can't identify, a plastic figurine of a Star Wars character that you're pretty sure was never in any of the films that you saw, or a Harry Styles badge with the name Harry Styles written with a deliberate misspelling that means that we can avoid paying royalties. You'll also get an HD DVD of a film from the early 2000s that you don't remember. Maybe starring Hayden Christensen, maybe starring Jessica Alba. If you're lucky, maybe both of them will be in it. And best of all, 1 month later, you'll get it all again. Now, if you're not happy with your subscription, it can be cancelled at any time by calling the number that we don't publish anywhere. Use that number to get another number, which will give you a website code to a page with another number on it, which you have to call between 9 and 10 on a Tuesday and ask to speak to Jeff. If Jeff's in, your sub will be cancelled in 20 working days. But bear in mind that Jeff only works 1 day a week and it's not Tuesday. Cancelled subs will continue to be charged, of course, but you just won't get your stuff. And for that, you should be grateful. So, what do you think? The Two Real Cinema Club Sub Club Geek Club Box Sub. You want stuff? We will send you stuff. Forever.
Best Christmas ever. Oh. And we are back. And next up is Full Metal Jacket, Stanley Kubrick's film from 1987, starring Matthew Modine as Joker, Vincent D'Onofrio as Gomer, or Gomer Pyle. I think they started calling him Pyle towards the end of the part of the film where he was. And I think it was R. Lee Emery as the drill sergeant.
Yeah.
Those are sort of the main characters in the film. I think I'd read somewhere, I don't know if I believe this, but this was Stanley Kubrick's last film, or next to last film released in the United States or something like that, which is 87. And then I think, what's the big one with the cruises?
Eyes Wide Shut was the only one after this.
Is that right?
His penultimate film.
Which is about 11 years later, something like that, 11, 12, 99 or 2000. So very interesting.
I think this came 7 years after The Shining, didn't it? I think. I mean, he took his time.
Oh, okay. All right. I remember being surprised when I read that. And I also remember being surprised by the film because I thought I had seen this film, but I don't think I had.
Oh.
I'm lying. I was lying. I thought, yeah, I'd seen that one. I probably had confused it well enough with Platoon, which came out, I think, maybe a year earlier.
Yeah, and there was Hamburger Hill came out about the same time as well.
There were a number of films in there, and I don't think I'd seen Full Metal Jacket, so it was new to me. It was based on a book by Gustav Hasford, who I guess was a Marine. He's got a very German-sounding name, but it might be an American. I'm not really sure.
Yeah, and he's American.
And you've read this, so this was based on his thing called The Short Timers, I believe.
The Short Timers, yeah. So we've watched 2 films and I read 2 books for this pod. Incredible.
So well educated.
Absolutely. The book is in some ways very similar to the film, and in some ways extremely different.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'll lean on you for that, and I'll give you, as your teacher, I'll give you a sticker star for reading the books and watching the films. Apparently, Kubrick wrote it mostly with Michael Herr, and then I guess in a couple of different articles, I'd read that he had talked with Hasford over the phone a bunch, but met with him maybe just once at most.
I think I read a story about this that apparently he met with Hasford once. That Michael Hare, the other writer, like hosted like a dinner. So Gustav Hasford came to Kubrick's house, and after about half an hour, Kubrick passed a little note under the table to Michael Hare, which said, "I cannot stand this man." I think he never met him again.
Oh my! Well, yeah, you sort of get that sense because there's not much made of Hasford at all, but it's definitely credited to being written by Kubrick and Hare. Shot mostly in England, which at first I was surprised about, but a little
shot
bit
entirely in England. Yeah, absolutely.
I think a little bit was done in California, is what I'd read, but and they had import like plastic palm trees from from
absolutely,
Asia. So,
yes.
Yeah, pretty wild.
So I think a lot of it shot at Beckton Gas Works and the Isle of Dogs. So it's just
Isle
like
of Dogs
East London.
Definitely came up. Yeah. Wow. Well, it passes for Vietnam pretty well, I would say.
Yeah.
Great opening image. I love the military, the Marine recruits, I guess, getting their hair just shaved off in a barber shop, and it's kind of nice. They eventually steal their names via the drill sergeant, who starts giving them names based on their one little piece of personality that he sees in the first meeting with them. But they kind of lose their identities immediately because they've lost their hair, and they're all uniformed up at Paris Island and the Marine drill camp or training camp. It sort of starts out as a multi-protagonist thing among the recruits. It sort of eventually becomes Joker's film, and Joker is the name given to the Matthew Modine character by their drill sergeant, who, yes, it's true, cliche, he's profane, he's tough on them, he's tough as nails, yelling all the time, but working them into proper Marines. But yeah, the Cliché Squad would definitely get a call on that, I think. But he is excellent, and Kubrick has the camera kind of rolling in circles in a lot of these scenes where they're right there in their bunkhouse and he's drilling them and sort of breaking them down mentally as well. And one character played by Vincent D'Onofrio, Pyle, he starts calling him Gomer Pyle and then just Pyle. He's really struggling. Joker mentors him, trying to help him with his gun and his marching style and all that. But Pyle just messes up again and again, and then everyone has to start paying for his mistakes. And there's this one scene where they're all putting, I guess, soap in their pillowcases or bags, and they just, in the middle of the night, they wake him up by beating him.
Yeah.
And he really loses his humanity, and that's going to play out farther on down the line. But it just goes to show, how tough things were in their camp, and how difficult it would be for someone who's a little bit more sensitive or not naturally tough, I suppose.
I mean, I'm guessing, today, would we not maybe think that Pyle has special needs? It's not that he's dumb and can't do it. He's actually, he's kind of can't quite do these things.
Yeah, and Vincent D'Onofrio plays that beautifully. He has sort of a similar character on American television. I forget what it is. It's one of the SUV shows or the
really?
Law and Order or some spin-off of that where he either I think he plays a bipolar character or something like that. So I don't know if it's something that is close to him personally or something that he does well as an actor. He's known doing it well. I mean, this is 87, so this is, we're looking at 35 years ago now. So they're all young men, like Matthew Modine and Vincent D'Onofrio are very, very young at this time. So you're seeing them as kids, really. And that's the other thing. They're just young. They're impressionable kids. Marines, it's something you enlist in. They have to accept a wide variety of people. So you'd think that they'd be sensitive to that somehow, but I think that part of the drilling here was just like drilling that sensitivity and that humanity out of them just to turn them into soldiers. So
I mean, that's the entire theme of, I guess, the theme of the film, isn't it? Is dehumanization.
Yeah,
war is hell.
Yeah.
Militarism is dehumanizing. That's like the take home
Yeah,
message.
it's almost that you have to dehumanize people if you're going to ask them to go dehumanize other people somehow. So
Yeah.
it's definitely rough. Lots of archetypes of characters like soldiers and drills, and but it's interesting. Joker's a journalist, or he wants to be a journalist, and he is interested in covering the war just as much. But the Act One curtain is really quite tragic. This is a lot of people have written about this film as like two films in a film, because
Yeah.
the opening is really all about their training at Paris Island, and it's probably 45 minutes, 48 minutes. And Gomer Pyle, the D'Onofrio character, kind of just loses his mental stability by the end of the whole training, and he's just sort of lounging around in the bathroom, singing at night, holding a gun. He ends up killing the drill sergeant, and himself in the bathroom just as he's completed training. So there's this real down moment at the end of the first half of the film, before we get into their actual lives in Vietnam. And then that's kind of where, to a certain extent, I think Pyle was carrying the film along with Joker, or their friendship was, but then all of a sudden it really becomes Joker's film on his own. He's breaking in as a journalist, as I said, and they're trying to win hearts and minds, and win battles at the same time. So it's sort of like using propaganda, I guess, to try and win this war in Vietnam as well. And I think there's a journalist-style voiceover at the beginning of the film, but then we start to hear them a little bit more. It's not a consistent device in the film. It's not a really strong device either, I didn't think. And I don't think it really helped the movie very much. Did you find any of that coming like right out of the book, the way the book is set up as well, or was there a relationship to the book in that way?
That part one of the movie, with the whole kind of training sequence going from having the haircuts to Pyle finally killing the sergeant and himself. I mean, that's lifted very, very directly from the book. A lot of the dialogue is lifted straight from the book. The events are written straight out of the book. But that takes the first 17% of the book to tell that bit of the story.
Yeah.
The book is largely, I would say, it's. I mean, the book is great. It's poetic. It varies a lot in style. It's written in the first person and present tense, so it does kind of read a little bit screenplay sometimes. But the book has sort of three parts, and it's largely three big set pieces with some connective tissue. And the three big set pieces are the training montage that we see in the film, very much as the book. And then there are two different sections where soldiers are pinned down by a sniper.
Oh, okay.
And the film sort of conflates those two sections into one.
Okay.
And that's kind of the shape of the book.
And it feels very much like a memoir, is it? Or is it a fictional piece?
And it feels very authentic.
Okay.
I think kind of Hasford said that he never actually murdered anyone himself.
Okay.
He was more a danger to himself than he was to the Viet Cong, but he certainly did serve, and it reads as a very authentic telling of the story of a young man in Vietnam.
Okay. All right, we'll comment on that a little bit later as we wind down, perhaps. I love one quote, which I thought was pretty well delivered by the editor to the Stars and Stripes magazine staff of writers, which Joker is a part. It's a new shit sandwich, and everybody is going to have to take a bite. So that sort of summed up the whole film. I think it sums up a good bit of, almost all of Vietnam as well. And it seems to be a turning point in the war. Is this the Tet Offensive? And Joker and sort of his photographer, Raptor Man, are sort of dragged into the Tet Offensive as journalists, but they're also firing weapons. So they are sort of embedded, and they're starting to see some action on the battlefield as well. This is one of the best details of the whole film that I liked, is when Raptor Man is trying to take a picture and his hand is shaking so much on the camera that he can barely, focus, barely take a picture. And I thought, well, that's perfect. This guy's absolutely scared. He's not seen any action really. All of a sudden, he's in battle, and he's gonna show it visually. He's gonna show it physically with a shaking camera. I thought that was really nice. And there's also this sort of film crew filming the lives of the Marines in Vietnam. Yeah. So it becomes this sort of documentary within a film that they cut to a little bit with questions and answers of the soldiers in the battlefield. For me, it was about this point that I thought this kind of feels like a plotless being there experience film. I really
Yeah.
the other film, All Quiet on the Western Front, definitely has like story structure, and that's why I was curious about this as a memoir, because it feels really authentic, yes, but adrift in terms of narrative. I thought
It feels like a series of sketches, I think, in a
it
way.
really
It's
does.
like
Yeah,
a sketch of them being, in the kind of the story room for the Stars and Stripes
yeah,
magazine.
yeah,
It's then there's a bit of action during the Tet Offensive, but then there's that's like a sketch of film crew interviews, which is sort of quite funny.
yeah,
And then there's like a couple of encounters with sex workers as well, which again like little sketches.
yeah.
No, nothing really connects to anything else. It's just a
Yeah.
bit of this, bit of that, bit of the other.
Yeah, and I struggle a little bit because I looked at Rotten Tomatoes. It's 90-something% fresh, and I heard so much about this film, but I wasn't really convinced about it as a real, coherent story, and I didn't find it to be a great film. But I did feel, okay, this is probably pretty accurate. A lot of war is boring, whereas a lot of war in the other film was much too exciting, I think. But the platoon that they're with sort of takes a village, costs them a couple of dead comrades, so they're really seeing the reality of the war finally from the journalist's perspective. There is that moment of prostitution, which is kind of like just doubly and triply racist. There's a lot of bad stuff going on at once. But I think the idea that you get is the men deserve a reward. They've just lost their comrades. Men in war need prostitutes. And they'll fight over them and underbid to pay as little as possible for the prostitute. It was probably a very realistic scene in some ways, but also just amazingly racist on a couple of different fronts.
I suppose it's an 80s film about a 60s time period, isn't it? It's like a double whammy, I suppose.
Not a great pairing.
Although I guess I think the film is probably self-conscious of its racism. I'm not sure about its attitude to women. We might talk about that later.
Yeah, that might be it. It's definitely not a great scene. So for me, it starts to really lack pace. You think of a war film as kind of having enough action to sustain and have a pace, but it never really gains that much momentum. It doesn't like put momentum and pace together in any direction at all. It seems a little directionless. They do reunite with one of their guys from the original boot camp, Cowboy, who's running sort of a unit, and they're trying to take this village, but there's a sniper there who's openly killed a number of their soldiers and friends, so they're trying to take out this sniper, and they eventually track down that sniper in a building. At the expense of Cowboy dying. So there's this added, there's that scene of Cowboy dying right in their arms, and it's very intentional, or very emotional, I should say. And they want to get revenge. And then the following action is that they actually end up tracking down the sniper. It ends up being Joker's confirmed kill. There was some mention about how many kills earlier in the film, and Joker finally gets one that's confirmed. It's the sniper, but the twist is that it's a young woman. It's a young Vietnamese girl, and she's still sort of alive, and they're all sort of wrestling with the, should they kill her? Should they take her in and try and, get her medical attention or whatever? And the whole scene plays out. I think, the theme that we're supposed to take away from the whole thing is they're alive. They live through this experience, and they sort of walk back into their next camp kind of victorious, but they're morally deadened, and they've just killed a young girl to get revenge. And that's more or less where it ends right there. So as I said, for me...
With them singing the Mickey Mouse song at the end, isn't it?
Yeah. For me, I was underwhelmed. Again, I think the structure really, I think, works against itself because you've just got that long first act, which you're right, is probably like a montage in a more modern film of 10 minutes. It's a full first act that's pasted onto a second act that doesn't have a lot of connection to it, and I don't really think there is really a third act to see to speak of. I think your way of looking at it might be more accurate of a number of sketches just kind of hanging together. I think the ironic thing is that there is this tremendous climax when Pyle kills himself. It's almost too early to be the end of the film. It definitely is too early to be the end of the film. So it comes too early in one sense, and it also comes too late in another way because it could have been a much shorter first act. So it's an interesting moment because it's so powerful, but I think it's misplaced in the time where it comes in the film.
I think I read that Kubrick was interested in experimenting with an unconventional structure. And this film certainly does have an unconventional structure. The question you have to ask now is, is that unconventional structure actually successful, or
Yeah.
would he maybe have been better off sticking to the the program?
Yeah.
I did see this film when it first came out
Okay.
in 1987.
Okay.
My kind of much cleverer and more cine literate film friend Jamal kind of said, "Oh, there's a new Kubrick film coming out. We should really go and see that." And I was only kind of vaguely aware of who Kubrick was, I think, because I'd seen 2001 as a boy. And when we went to see it in the cinema, I was fairly shocked by this film. Again, it's very violent.
Yeah.
It's extremely tense. I think there's great control of atmosphere. Both the the tension of the scene where Pyle commits his final acts, and the set piece at the end of the film with the sniper.
Yeah.
I think are real edge of your seat cinematic moments. I think they're very skillfully made.
Yeah.
But I agree with you. Yeah, I think that otherwise the connective tissue is a little bit kind of weak and friable. I came away, thinking that it had fairly clearly communicated this notion that war is hell.
Yeah.
And that militarism is dehumanizing. One thing that I thought Full Metal Jacket did a little bit better, I think, than All Quiet on the Western Front was this idea about fate being very fickle. That I feel a little bit like the characters who die in All Quiet often die because they make a foolish decision, or they were weak, or they did the wrong thing. Whereas I feel like in Full Metal Jacket, the reason why characters die is entirely coincidental. It's not the ones who mess up who die. The ones who die are the ones who fate has decided should die. And it's not the most or the least skillful. Your abilities don't really make any difference to whether you're going to make it out or not. It's just some of you will catch a bullet and some of you will not.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt like that in a way was a better idea about the futility of war than just the sheer destruction that we see in All Quiet.
Yeah.
Interesting. This film also has an anachronistic soundtrack, doesn't it? So it has the it has a few 60s songs in it, a few licensed songs, but there's this kind of early sort of electronic Fairlight soundtrack with sort of like samples being played back very slowly, which apparently is done by Kubrick's daughter.
Oh, really?
Under an assumed name, Abigail Mead. It's interesting that the films have those two things in common.
Yeah. Because the electronic music of Full Metal Jacket is probably 20 years beyond the actual setting of the film.
Yeah.
That makes sense, yeah.
One thing which I'd never kind of thought about until seeing it again now, the shiny red and white sort of barrack dorm room where a lot of that first third of the film happens, and it's like a very highly polished floor and a very illuminated ceiling. And correct me if I'm wrong, how well do you know The Shining?
It's been a while, but yeah, I do remember it a little bit, yeah.
There's that kind of very, very brightly lit red washroom in The Shining.
Yeah, of course.
Where he meets the kind of like, the ghost of the concierge or whatever.
Yeah.
I thought that seemed really, really similar to the barrack room in Full Metal Jacket.
Sure. Well,
and I don't know whether I was just wondering whether, am I making that up, or is that actually like a proper Kubrick motif?
Could be a Kubrick motif. Yeah, exactly. Well, those two are six years apart, and you said there's no film in between those two that he made.
No, exactly.
Okay. Yeah, probably. I think you're putting a director like Kubrick's going to put his own touches on things, and that would make sense. Yeah, I like what you've said about like this sort of destiny versus fate kind of theme popping up in the two films. I mean, one thing I did like about All Quiet on the Western Front, though, was also the way that in a straight up American film that doesn't consider those things, Paul probably lives at the end and goes home and has a family and all that, and he can talk about the war, but he dies at the end of the film. And I think more compelling was the moment when Kaz dies in that film, because you're not expecting him to die. The war's basically over. You think they're both going to survive at that moment. And it's really well done in the sense that he does get shot by a boy who's about the same age that his own son would be if he hadn't died. And the filmmakers actually, first of all, you don't even know that he's shot for a little while. Then you realize he's shot. And then Paul even carries him into the camp basically to try and get medical attention. It's not until he's been sitting in that camp waiting for medical attention that he actually dies, and you learn that he's dead. So I love the way they played with the fate there quite a bit. But it's true that, like, in part, both of those guys can die because they've stolen geese. It's like you have to have a reason to die. You have to have done something. And, from what I could tell, yeah, they've killed people in battle, but does that count? Their fates are, when I think of it, it's a little cumbersome the way it's set up, but I bought it, hook, line, and sinker when I was watching the film because it made such great sense, and it went against a lot of these conventions of these guys are the ones we've been following. They're the heroes, so they're going to live. Whereas in Joker sort of becomes the protagonist accidentally when Pyle dies, and as I said before, you're not really following anyone that closely because, in part, I think you're spot on this. Anyone could die at any moment, and I think that's a theme that comes out probably better in Full Metal Jacket, even though it's obviously happening, to exponentially in All Quiet on the Western Front.
So overall, I take it you weren't that impressed by the Kubrick film?
I wasn't blown away. I mean, I'm not a massive Kubrick fan to begin with, but I felt oddly unentertained. I guess I wanted to be entertained. That sounds crazy. It's a war film, but I mean, so I enjoyed the realism of it. But it's that Hitchcock thing where sometimes you need to cut some of the realism out in order to get some exciting story going. And I was never like just sitting with bated breath watching that film. It was more like, okay, this is happening for 40 minutes, and then this is happening for 50 minutes, and then a little action at the end to give it some, wrap it up with a little bow on it or whatever. But I never felt that connected to it. Whereas it's hard to take your eyes off the screen on All Quiet on the Western Front.
Yeah, I was very impressed by Full Metal Jacket when I saw it as a teenager, and had never seen it again until this week. Coming back to it a second time round, I still think it's a very good film. I think it's very well made. I think it does feel a little bit loose, and I do have some questions about the structure. But I think part of the cliche of things like the tough drill instructor may have originated in part from this film. In the same way that I remember seeing Raging Bull and thinking, oh, this is just like all the other boxing pictures, not really realizing that, oh, no, this was the first boxing picture that did this. And all the other boxing pictures have just copied it.
Yep. I think you're right.
I wonder whether Full Metal Jacket has been the source of some of the cliches that we now recognize around war movie storytelling.
Call back this Cliché Squad. Don't send them in after all. I think you're right. I mean, those scenes with the drill instructor are they're so profane, just vulgar, grotesque, violent, hilarious. I mean, they are fun to watch, and they're really fun in their filming, too, because he's just going around in circles, and the camera's just following him, and there aren't a lot of cuts in there, so he's coming up with a lot of long dialogue scenes and pulling them off beautifully. So I do agree with you there. I think there's some great elements, but it's funny because that disappears after 45 minutes or so, and then it really does feel like a completely different film.
Trying to bring those two films together, I think they are pretty congruent. I think the anti-war sentiment feels of a fairly similar tone in both of these films. I think they belong together. They would happily sit together in a double bill. I do think, notably, Full Metal Jacket doesn't have the cliche that I call the squad over of having the brass eating pastries and smoking cigars.
That's true.
And I think it's better for it. But on the other hand, All Quiet, I think it is more spectacular. It's more spectacular, but less sophisticated. That's what I think. I mean, in partly, it's more spectacular because thanks to digital, it's possible to create these enormous vistas without enormous expense. Whereas Kubrick, you had to find an actual gasworks and actually dress it as an actual Vietnamese city and then actually blow it up.
Yeah.
So everything is practical in that film. Whereas I feel like in All Quiet, probably there's a lot which is not practical.
Yeah, I would say that there's a different level of lawlessness in the two films. Like in Full Metal Jacket, like no one's in control. There's nothing organized about it. Whereas in All Quiet on the Western Front, they're doing a lot of lawless stuff. Obviously, there's lots of murder and craziness, but you do feel like there are commanders. There's someone who's got their hands on the mechanics and making things happen. So I think you have to examine those two different levels of chaos, I guess. But I was just going to ask you quickly,
Yeah.
because we should wind it down, of course. But from the memoir level, I mean, you've done all this research, you've read the two books, you've seen the two films. Is there any balance between book and film, or a connection between book and film on the two that you would mention?
Both of the books are quite piecemeal. They're both memoirs. They both don't have a tremendously strong, unified through line. Neither of them have a main protagonist who has a problem to solve and a quest to go on. They both read like, well, this happened to me, then that happened to me, and this happened to a guy I knew, but I'm going to put it in the mouth of the character who's writing the book.
Yeah.
I think I can imagine what may have appealed to Kubrick when he read The Short Timers, because there are three big set pieces. The training section, is very, very similar in the film to the book. The sniper section that happens in the middle of the book is, an enormous set piece. The soldiers are pinned down by a sniper who's hiding in a series of buildings, and so the soldiers manage to flag down a tank, and the tank just demolishes each building in turn. While the guys who are on foot, they're kind of running from one building to another and seeing, is the sniper in here? No, smash this building. Is the sniper in here? No, smash this building. But they can't get the timing quite right. And so the buildings blow up, but then some of the soldiers fall through the ceiling as the building collapses. And, it's a very, very exciting to 20 or 30 pages. And I can easily imagine any director reading that and thinking, wow, this would be amazing on screen. Yeah. But when it came to doing it practically, it's just not possible. They weren't able to either build or find a row of Vietnamese-looking houses that they could damage and blow up with a tank. So the film then ended up kind of conflating that part of the story with the second sniper encounter in the book, which is an encounter between. I'm trying to think whether I'm not sure if it's the first or the second sniper who is a teenage girl. But basically, those two episodes have both been kind of rolled together into something which was filmable in 1987.
Okay. Wow.
So both of the films have both of the books have cinematic elements. Both of the films have sort of capitalized on what was good and tried to thin out what wasn't quite so good. Have they been successful? I don't know. One last thought from me. We said we would come back to this. I think All Quiet on the Western Front does take a more modern attitude towards women, doesn't it? That instead of seeing prostitutes as a reward, the boys who carry this sort of scarf or this undergarment around are actually they're kind of sort of young and naive and sort of starry-eyed, aren't they?
Yeah,
rather than sort of rapacious and lustful.
True. Yeah, and the displacement of proper suitors for the French women probably off fighting somewhere else. So
yep.
These are the boys they can date. But again, they've kind of earned their fate. I think everyone who goes off and has an affair with a French woman in that film also gets killed in battle. So.
Yes, it's like an 80s horror film, isn't it? Teenagers who have sex will get killed.
Yeah.
That's how it works.
Yeah. Nothing is fair in love and war, apparently. Excellent.
Well, I feel fairly traumatized by these two films, I must say.
Well, we've got further trauma coming in a couple weeks. We will be reviewing Wakanda Forever.
Yeah.
The follow-up film to Black Panther. And we're going to pair that with a Brazilian film from 1984 called Quilombo, which we're going on my memory as being an excellent film. We're going to put those two together and see how they fare in the Two Wheel Cinema Club treatment.
Comparing it to Quilombo. I'm sorry, I was saying comparing it to and then giving you a gap to say it, but I think Google Meets has let us down.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, I did say Quilombo. Yeah, I promise.
Oh, you did say. Oh, then it dropped out. Oh, I've completely messed it up then. Okay.
I think I already ended the show, Jimmy. We're into extra time. So for this week, I'm going to sign off. My name's Andres Lorente, and the other guy.
And I'm James Speaker, and this has been fun as always. See you next time. Okay, thanks.
Bye, everyone.